Thank you for joining me for this introduction to centering prayer. In this video, I'd like to speak to the what, the how, and the why of centering prayer. And at the end of the video, there will be an opportunity to join in a 5-minute guided meditation. First, I'd like to speak to the why of centering prayer. I came to the practice of centering prayer myself about 20 years ago at a time in my life when I was feeling very urgently the need to learn to pray. I was an ordained priest. I knew how to lead worship. I knew how to pray the daily office out of the Book of Common Prayer, reading scripture daily. I even knew how to pray extemporaneously in groups. But when I sat down in silence by myself to pray, I found that in my prayer, I was just going round and round in my head with a chatter of words, just words, words, words. And I thought there must be a way of getting deeper in my prayer. And I'd heard of centering prayer as a form of prayer without words, and that intrigued me. I learned the practice of centering prayer through Cynthia Bourgeault's book, Centering Prayer and Inner Awakening, an excellent book that I highly recommend. I learned more about centering prayer by participating in Cynthia's wisdom schools, and I became a commissioned presenter of centering prayer through training with Contemplative Outreach, the worldwide organization founded by Thomas Keating. And I do this work of presenting the spiritual practice of centering prayer. I do this work because I think it's important for a number of reasons. I've found it important in my own life. It's improved my quality of life in 100 ways. I think it could also be of usefulness for other people in the same way. But I also am doing this work because I feel that this practice has something to offer our church today. Western Christianity, and our Episcopal Church in particular, are good at giving us frameworks for what I would call the outward aspects of our religion. We're good at giving intellectual frameworks, theology, theological reflection with scripture and so forth. We're good at giving frameworks of worship through our ritual and liturgy. We're good at giving frameworks for making moral and ethical decisions for our actions in the world. But I think that there's something else that people are looking for that we're not offering, which is a way of practice that allows for a deep, personal, intimate encounter with the presence of the divine in our lives. I actually think that is what many people are seeking when they come through our doors, whether they know it or not. And I think that centering prayer offers a way for the church to give people a way to have this kind of deep interpersonal experience of the presence of the divine. I think that centering prayer gives us the opportunity finally to address problems in the world from a different point of view, from a different standpoint of being. If we seriously look at the problems in the world, problems of violence, of political oppression, of economic injustice, of our failure to live sustainably with the natural world and the planet, if we look at these problems facing us in the world, we know, I think, that truly to address these challenges will require more than better education, changes in our laws, different economic practices, and so on, as important as those things are. To really live in the world differently in a way that's sustainable and just, to live in the world that we dream of and that we know is possible, that will require a deep transformation, beginning at the personal level. And I think centering prayer is a practice that offers us the possibility, cooperating with God's grace, for that transformation in our lives, so that we can show up differently in the world as less self-centered, more able to act not only in our own personal interest, but acting out of a sense of the interests of our neighbors, of the community, of the natural world. I think that centering prayer offers us an opportunity to become more capable of cooperating with grace in a way that God's will be done on earth as in heaven. I'd like to speak now about what the practice of centering prayer is, particularly how it is like and unlike other meditative practices. One thing that the mystical streams of virtually all of the world's religious traditions tell us is that for most of us, most of the time in our day-to-day life, we are asleep. We are superficially awake and acting and thinking and so on. But for most of us, most of the time, our attention, our awareness is captive to our thinking mind, and our thinking mind is generating a fairly random stream of thoughts, none of which bring us into the present moment, all of which take us either into the past, reliving times of the past, or things we've seen or heard, or projecting us into the future, fantasies of the future or worries about the future. And this stream of thoughts, together they comprise what we think of as our psychological self. They give us our identity. They're full of ideas and notions and memories of who we are and who we aren't, what we like, what we don't like, what people we belong to, what we don't belong to, what we're good at, what we're not good at, and so forth. This stream of random thoughts out of our thinking mind is conditioned by our cultural influences, by our personal experiences, and out of that conditioning we frame our sense of who we are as separate selves in the world. We take these thoughts and we construct for ourselves a narrative, a story that I tell myself about myself, who I am, and so forth. But as long as we are captive, our attention is captive to this fairly automatic, really unconscious stream of thoughts going on in our thinking minds, we're not truly either present to the moment and what presents itself to us in the moment. We're not really present to the fullness of our true selves. So all meditative practices seek to find a way to liberate us from our captivity, our unconscious captivity to the stream of thoughts in our thinking mind, in order to become more present to the moment, more present to the fullness of our own being. And various meditative practices have different strategies for this. Many of us may be familiar with meditative practices that come to us from Eastern spiritual cultures, and many of these work with the attention, focusing the attention, maybe on something that we see, an image, an icon, flame of a candle. Maybe we're focusing our attention on a word or phrase that we repeat to ourselves, a mantra. Or perhaps we focus our attention on sensations in our body, or breathing in and breathing out, or even, say, sensations in our upper lip. These are all ways of focusing the attention to wake us up from the automatic captivity of our awareness to the unconscious flow of our thinking mind. Centering prayer, however, works not so much with the attention as it does with the intention, with our willingness, our decision in particular, a decision to let go of thoughts as we become aware that our attention has been captured by a thought. Let go of our thoughts in order to let our attention rest in our hearts for the purpose there of giving our willing consent to opening there at our heart center, opening to the presence of the divine. Now I'm going to say more about all of that when I speak of how the practice works, but I want to speak now about what we mean by the heart center, or also we call it the mystical heart. First of all, the heart center is a measurable field of energy that is capable of holding simultaneously, in a moment, in a holistic way, all the input from our thinking mind, from our emotions, and also from the sensations of our bodies. The heart center processes all of this input in an instantaneous and holistic way that's much different from the processing of our thinking mind, which is linear and sequential. If you've ever had the experience of working with some dilemma and you focus your thinking mind on this dilemma and you just go round and round in circles and you can't come to clarity. And then maybe you're taking a shower, maybe you're out for a walk, maybe you're cooking dinner or doing the dishes, and then suddenly, all at once, as if out of nowhere, you know the answer. And you know it completely. You know it in all its dimensions, and you know it all at once. This is the processing of the heart center and its way of knowing. The heart center is also, it's a sense of how we deeply know what is true. When we hear something, when we encounter something, and something deep in us says, yes, that's true. We know it by resonance, not by a process of thinking it through, but by immediate resonance at that deep place in ourselves, our heart of hearts, the mystical heart. This mystical heart is our organ of spiritual perception. It opens our awareness to higher realms of knowing, higher realms of being. It's a portal for inspiration, a portal for what the Sufis call the imaginal realm, to have some input into our lives. Again, it may come in that spontaneous knowing of something in complexity about who we are, what we are to do in the world. Or artists experience it as an inspiration where a piece of music or a piece of art, sculpture may come into the mind all at once in all of its aspects as if out of nowhere. Or a scientist might have a eureka moment where all the data suddenly comes all together and there's an understanding that they did not arrive at through a sequential, linear, rational process. As well, it's a portal to those higher realms, like Jacob's ladder. Through the mystical heart, we have access to the higher realms, not only to lift up our prayers, but to receive that sense of presence. In centering prayer, we release our attention from the thinking mind, allow it to drift very gently down to our heart center, so that there we may give willingly our consent to opening more and more, opening that portal more and more to the presence of the divine. Studies have shown that the regular practice of meditational practices like centering prayer have the effect over time of physically changing our brains, of getting our brains out of the rut of their habitual automatic thinking and creating new neural pathways to bring our attention more to those parts of our mind that perceive not our separate selves, but perceive our connectedness to other people, to the natural world, and that perceives ultimately our unity with the divine. And now for the how of centering prayer. I'd like to take us through the practice step by step. This practice, this distinctively Christian form of meditative prayer, has its roots in the monastic communities of the desert mothers and fathers in Egypt and Syria in the 4th century. Practice was preserved as part of the Benedictine rule for monastic communities in the West for more than 1,500 years. And the Trappist monk Thomas Keating and his brothers took this prayer, this form of prayer, that from that deep tradition and offered it outside the walls of the monastery to the world at large. This practice was first articulated in a work in the late 14th century by an anonymous English monk in a work called The Cloud of Unknowing, where he spoke by a way of reaching and coming to know God not through our thoughts, because our thoughts can never comprehend God, but coming to know God through love, that is, through the opening of our hearts to God, putting all else, all thoughts of ourselves and the world under our feet, under a cloud of unknowing. And the cloud of unknowing specifies a particular tool for the process of letting go of our thoughts. And this tool is known as a sacred word. Now, what Thomas Keating has made clear is that this sacred word is not a word that's meant to draw our attention to itself. It's not supposed to have some content that moves us in any way or captures our attention in any particular way. It's an instrument for reminding us of our intention. Remember, centering prayer works with our intention. But we, first of all, so to enter the practice, we first find that sacred word. Cloud of Unknowing is very specific in saying it should be a word of one syllable. I think of that just as to be a kind of tap on the shoulder. It could be God, it could be life, light, home, what have you. But a word of one syllable. And the only thing that makes the word work is that we remember it and we use it in the way it's intended to be used. The only thing we don't want to do is change our word in midstream or in any other way, be thinking about our word, because that just captures us in another thought. So once we have that tool ready at hand, we have our sacred word in mind, we enter centering prayer, and Cynthia Bergeau is very good about this. We enter this by making an agreement with ourselves, a kind of covenant with ourselves, that for a specific length of time, typically 20 minutes or so, we agree with ourselves that for that length of time, as often as we discover that our attention has been distracted by a thought, any thought whatever, a minor thought, a major thought, a significant thought, an insignificant thought, a pleasant thought or an unpleasant thought, even if it's a thought of tremendous spiritual insight, whatever thought it is, we release it. And in order to return our attention to rest, to abide in our heart center, so that there we may willingly consent to open more and more to the divine presence. So the key to it is that agreement we make with ourselves to let go of thoughts as often as we find ourselves in a thought, any thought whatsoever. And that's the purpose of the sacred word. That when I, as it were, wake up to an awareness that, I'm thinking about X, Y, Z, that's when I bring my sacred word. And the purpose of the sacred word is to remind me, oh yes, for these 20 minutes, I'm letting go of my thoughts and letting my attention rest in my heart center. So I bring to mind my sacred word and I repeat it inwardly for as often as I need to for my attention to let go of that thought and return to my heart center. And when it does that, the word just sort of dissolves. It has served its purpose. Now, I might find myself again caught in thought 3 seconds later, half a second later. I may have to consciously release my thoughts using my sacred word 100, 1,000, 10,000 times in the course of 20 minutes, or it may seem like that. The purpose of centering prayer is not to have any kind of experience. It's not to experience bliss. It's not to experience empty mind. It's not to have any kind of content of insight or inspiration at all. The whole purpose of centering prayer is to work with that intention. The intention, as often as is necessary for that 20 minutes, to let go of thoughts. And it's in that practice of letting go of our thoughts that the benefit of centering prayer, the very subtle neurological rewiring of our brains out of their habitual paths of captivity to the thinking mind. It's in that practice, that determination, that willingness consistently to let go of our thoughts as often as we find ourselves distracted by a thought, and returning our attention to our heart center. That's the practice, to willingly let go of our thoughts. And as for the rest, that opening of our hearts, that is something, in a sense, purely passive, purely receptive. It's simply our allowing, our bringing down the walls, our opening the gates of our hearts to that divine presence, which over time, in a very subtle way, we may come to sense, not in our physical bodies, but as it were, in our energetic bodies. So now we will have an opportunity to practice for 5 minutes. I will lead a guided meditation to take us through this practice step by step. To begin our practice, as with many meditation practices, it's good to pay attention first to positioning our bodies, to our posture, to be in a seated, upright position, perhaps on a kneeling bench, could be kneeling, upright position. But the point of it is both to be relaxed and alert, and we might take a moment just to notice the uprightness of our spine. This is known to be conducive to a meditative practice. And as with many of these spiritual practices, we can help ourselves out and increase our ability to enter deeply into these practices if we make a habit of the practices. If, say, we practice at the same time, preferably morning and evening on a daily basis, perhaps sitting in the same place. Maybe we would create for ourselves a kind of sacred space in our homes. Perhaps there's a candle, perhaps there's an icon, perhaps we have a chime, whatever. Outward things might help us through the familiarity of our physical state to enter into a deeper inner state. So again, to enter the practice, first we have in mind our sacred word. So I'll pause just for a second for us to bring to mind a word, preferably of one syllable, that we will use during the practice. In any moment when we become aware that our attention has become captive to a thought, we've become distracted, we bring our word, repeating it inwardly, to remind ourselves of our intention. So, having that sacred word now in mind, we solidify, formalize for ourselves our intention. Just inwardly, we make an agreement with ourselves that for a space of time, Right now, that's just going to be 5 minutes, but typically 20 minutes. For that space of time, it is our intention that as often as we find ourselves distracted by a thought, we will bring our sacred word as a way of releasing that thought and allowing our attention to rest and to abide in our heart center, there to give our consent to opening to the divine presence. So that's our intention. So really the only way to fail, so to speak, in this practice is not to do it, to break that agreement that we make with ourselves. And as I say, it's a practice of intention. We set our intention, and then we carry out that intention. And it might all flow beautifully through our time of silence. The silence might pass in a kind of magical way, or it might be a rough going. We might find ourselves continuously distracted by thoughts. Often the most difficult thoughts for me to release are thoughts about the practice itself, or how I'm doing. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Or, wow, look at me, I'm really doing well at this. Or, how much time is left and this is endless, or whatever it may be. Any thought whatsoever. We are meant to honor our intention of releasing that thought. So we make that agreement with ourselves. Now, in practicing this on your own, of course, an outward silence will help with the inner silence. But for the purpose of this training video, I'm going to speak from time to time during the 5 minutes, really just as a way of reminding us of the practice and encouraging us in the practice. So you may wish to close your eyes or give your eyes a relaxed focus on the ground before you, perhaps focus on a candle, but I will ring a chime and we will begin 5 minutes of centering prayer. Our intention is to rest our awareness in our heart center. Giving our willing consent for that mystical heart to open. Consent to receiving the presence of the divine. As our attention becomes distracted, as we become aware that we are in a thought, we bring our sacred word to bear repeating that word inwardly as a way of releasing the thought, simply allowing that thought to float downstream, allowing our attention to sink, drift downward, to rest, to abide in our heart center. As often as is necessary, we bring our sacred word to assist us to release our thoughts. We bring no judgment as to the nature of our thoughts, no judgment as to our performance in the practice or of anything else. Our attention is simply to release any thought. To rest in our hearts. To give our consent to opening to the presence. We'll take one more minute of silence. Now, very gently, as we come to the end of our practice time, very gently, we return our attention to our space, to our time. We want to be very gentle in the transition, allowing some quality of our inner quiet to come with us into our lives. thank you for joining this introduction to centering prayer. Blessings.